And that's the greatest of the commandments. It's all about love. What's up, everybody? This is Joshy Red from Practical Theism. Happy Friday. It's Friday, finally. Friday. Ready for the weekend. Got some fun things happening on the weekend. Getting ready to head into work. Just want to do a quick reflection on Mark 12, which is the gospel reading today. And this is what it's all about, this gospel passage. Basically, Christ is talking to a scribe and talking to a Pharisee about he was asked, what's the greatest of the commandments? Talking about all the Old Testament commandments, all the the laws that were laid down in the Old Testament. What's the greatest of them? And he says very, very pointedly, he's like, the greatest of them is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Buddhist, whatever flavor of religion you might potentially be, this rings particularly true, particularly the love your neighbor as yourself. Everybody knows the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, or even the platinum rule, treat others the way they want to be treated. That is the ultimate end of the commandments of Christ, is love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. But there is an interesting thing, I think, in its simplicity. Sometimes we take a ultra simplistic route when it comes to this idea of love, to where we kind of confuse what love really is and what love really isn't. I've said several times on this channel, you've probably heard it kind of around if you've heard other apologists and people talk about what love is and what love isn't. Love, I take Aquinas' definition, which is willing the good of the other as other. So willing the good of the other person just because they are who they are. Everybody has a dignity, an innate worth, and when we truly are loving someone, we are willing them to be to have the ultimate good, their ultimate end, whatever that potentially might look like. And I think sometimes when we look at the idea of loving God, right, with all our heart, soul, and mind, some of us put it at a distance, right? In its simplicity, it seems straightforward, love God. And some people take that as, well, make an assent of faith, and that's it. Don't worry about anything else. That shows that you love God because you said you love God, right? Well, actions speak louder than words, and I think there's a lot bundled up in that idea of loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, because it produces necessary action and change and transformation in the life of a believer, because grace is now the love of God, as Romans tells us, is poured out into our hearts. And so what is poured out into our hearts, we are to give away as a gift too, and that is part of the aspect of loving God. Also, if you love God, you're going to love your neighbor, because if you love God, you love what he created, and his creation is all of us, right? So in order to fully fulfill the commandment of loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, it necessitates that we love our neighbor. But not just that we listen to what Jesus is telling us to do. When you have, I run into this too with a bunch of different Christian traditions, and sometimes people are like, well, it doesn't matter if you go to church. It doesn't matter if you're involved in the life of the church. It doesn't matter if you're involved in giving back to the poor, or it doesn't matter if you get baptized, or it doesn't matter about the Eucharist or communion or anything like that. And I think it really, if we're going, like I said in the other video the other day, if we are going to put our faith in Jesus, put our faith in God, and love God, which ultimately we would will what he wants if we're truly loving him, because we would will God's good, and he is goodness itself, different story. But if we were to will God's good and we were to truly, truly love him with all our heart, soul, and mind, we would necessarily want to obey him. And obedience, which is part and parcel with faith, comes about by listening to Jesus. If we do not intend to, if we want to put our faith in someone, it would be ludicrous to think that we would not intend to follow his advice or do what he says, right? So if we're really putting our faith in God, putting our faith in Jesus, when he tells us, things like, in John 6, eat my flesh and drink my blood, and he institutes the Passover communion, through the upper room institution, take, eat, this is my body with the bread, and take, drink, this is my blood with the wine. That is something that he passed down to us for us to engage with. And it's obviously valuable, otherwise he wouldn't have done it. Additionally, Additionally, there are other things that go along with that. For example, when he says to Nicodemus in John 3:5, talking about being born again, like that's kind of a thing. Take his advice and actually do it. Now contrast that too with loving our neighbor, willing the good of our neighbor. I think we dilute it in today's society. We really do. We take this idea of love and we kind of confuse it with tolerance. Or we see this all across. Take any number one of the social issues, political issues, whatever the garbage is that's going on in modern society today. You are going to have things that are mistaken as love. If love is truly willing the good of the other, it necessarily sacrifices a desire and the good of ourselves for someone else, right? And but love also is not just bland tolerance. It's not bland tolerance of ideas, ideologies, and it's actually standing up for what's true and what's right, and where people can actually have their ultimate fulfillment. Now, that's not to be confused with. That's not to be confused with acceptance of a behavior is completely different from acceptance of a person. We have to separate issues from people, right? We absolutely have to. And truly loving someone, truly willing their good, willing their ultimate end, is not supposed to be done in a hostile, violent way. It's always meant to be done with love, with charity, and that comes from charity, really. And that's something that God helps us out with, because that's ultimately what God wants for us. But it's standing up for right truth. It's standing up, and everybody's got a lot of different ideas of what truth is and what right truth is. And I get that, but truly willing the good of another is standing up for truth. And that means constantly uncovering and discerning and figuring out what ultimate truth is and where it ultimately lies. And then sharing it in a charitable way, sharing it in a way that people are receptive to it, but then loving a person, truly loving the person. You have the idea, right? Hate the sin, love the sinner, right? Every single one of us sins, every single one of us falls short. And when we truly love our neighbor, we have a very radical approach against the sin, against the behavior, and we articulate it with charity. But on the other side, we absolutely love and include and never, ever shy away from bringing and encouraging and engaging the sinner to come into full communion with God and the life of his church. Because when someone is fully aligned with God's will, that is when we see them fully alive. And we're all imperfect, and we never get it right, and we always slip up, and we're always constantly refining and reproving. I know I am. And so I think it's very important that we think with that. So simple 2 commandments, difficult to sometimes live out and to pay attention to, because they there's a lot that's boiled up in those. They're an unpacked bag, if you will. So anyways, hope you guys have a great Friday. It's Fish Friday, so eat lots of fish today. Anyways, hit that like button, pound that subscribe button like you mean it, so you can get more of this awesome content. And from all of us here at Practical Theism, we'll catch you next time.